Beijing joins us now with more analysis. He's a co-founder and CEO of analytics company GRisk. He's also a non-resident fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Kind of a strange week. All indications leading up to it, we're going to get a deal. And then we got Trump's tweets, and we'll put them up on the screen. We've lost $500 billion a year for many years. Crazy trade with China, no more. Tariffs will make our country stronger. He goes on to say, not weaker. Just sit back and watch. In the meantime, China should not renegotiate deals with the U.S. And he goes on further. We know the tweets now by heart. We've read them. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I think first of all, the logic behind Trump's tweets, the economic logic, is deeply flawed. The way he does his cost-benefit analysis in terms of tariffs and trade doesn't make economic sense at all, because having a trade deficit with China or having a trade deficit of $400 billion with China does not mean that the U.S. consumers are not benefiting from the same sort of import from China. So that cost-benefit analysis is not just a matter of losing money to China. So I think that's the first flaw in this argument. The second,
and the tariffs making us stronger. I mean, the consumers here in the United States end up paying for this, not China, as he keeps pointing out.
Exactly, and by our calculations, I think an individual U.S. consumer would probably have to share around $700 of extra burden in their annual expenses, purchasing furniture, consumer goods, you name it, at grocery stores. So that burden is going to be borne by the American consumers for sure.
And this tit-for-tat kind of quality of a trade war, we heard Vice Premier Liu He, very measured, almost kind of cautiously optimistic. Generally, somebody throws down the gauntlet, the other side comes down. Do you expect, I mean, it seems like China's playing this differently than in the past, where you do this, I do that, a kind of game of chess. What do you see as their next move?
Well, in this round of talks, I mean, Vice Premier Liu He is an economist by training, and the way he looks at these things, is from an economist's perspective. The best thing for China to do, from a purely economic perspective, politics aside, is actually nothing. Because that, retaliating against the U.S., this tit for tat is also going to hurt Chinese consumers. It's going to hurt American consumers. It's going to hurt all the bystanders, such as the Canadian consumers. So from that regard, I would argue that what China would do is to let this round of political discussions play out, still maintaining that what they have already agreed. I think we mentioned earlier that 90% of the text were already agreed upon during the last round of talks. So maintain that as a base case, as a base position, and then see how politics would play out between these two countries, and eventually come to a more structural solution to this very structural issue.
It's interesting. One of the contentions that the U.S. president has also made is if we don't need their stuff, we can create it here, bring manufacturing back to the United States. Marketplace did a piece earlier this year, Trump's war and what's happened. Here's what they found, and here's a quote from the story. It was published in late January of this year. The number of factory jobs in America today is the same as it was the day that Pearl Harbor was attacked. Those jobs aren't coming back.
Right, and that's where I think the current administration and the American political establishment have to figure out what to do next, because the jobs loss is not only because of trade with China, it's because of technological advancement, and it's going to be because of artificial intelligence and technology down the road. So this issue of jobs loss, or manufacturing jobs loss especially, would require a lot more from the American side to look at how the economy in America functions, what kind of position this country wants to take in the global value chain, and are we going to dial back to the 1950s and 60s where where America was the factory of the world, or are we going to take a much more advanced, and to me, honestly, a more leading perspective to lead innovation, to lead, for example, innovation in artificial intelligence, right? So these are the things that I think the American public and politicians will have to really grapple and decide.
Well, let's go there just maybe in about 20 seconds. It's interesting because initially you see this as globalization, isolationism, but it's also what you're talking about, AI, 5G, China's focused on that. And Trump keeps talking about getting manufacturing jobs. One's the past, the other's the future.
Exactly. I think that has a lot to do with Donald Trump as an individual, as his experience in business and in politics as well. But we're already seeing a lot of the so-called balkanization of technology, where different countries and different regions, companies develop their own standard for technology, and then that's not going to benefit anybody. Imagine if in the 1900s, every country decided that, okay, we're going to have our own standard for cars, for automobile. You won't have successful companies like Ford or GM or Toyota for that matter. So it's really, I think the whole of international society would have to come to a candid dialogue to figure out where do we go as a global community. And honestly, I think the China-U.S. trade negotiations is contributing to that dialogue, because you have to make this an open exchange.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, and it's one that continues. Sean, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.